Hello and welcome to this episode of A Language I Love Is, the podcast that's all about languages, linguistics, and love. I am your host, Danny, and today's episode is a return to the Slavic language family. Now, each Slavic language of today might seem to neatly correspond to a country where people speak it. There's Slovak in Slovakia, Czech in the Czech Republic, Croatian in Croatia, Bulgarian in Bulgaria, and so on. Yet, as we've explored many times on the show before, the reality is a lot more complicated, and many Slavic languages defy national borders. Today's starring language is a prime example. Spoken primarily in Austria, but also in neighbouring countries, this language is a variety of Croatian, although you may notice that Croatia and Austria don't share a border. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to A Language I Love Is, wherever you get your podcasts, and leave a rating, review, or a comment. Now, let's join my guest today, Dr Katharina Tyran, who is a native speaker and researcher of this language, which is called Burgenland Croatian.
Ja sam Angela Šumić, rođena sam u Uzlepu, imam 13 let staru kćer i živim s mojim mužem. Ja ću vam povedati od mojega žitka kako se to razvilo s hrvatskim. Kad sam ja šla školu u Uzlopu, v osnovnu školu, onda je bilo tako da smo se najvećim dijelom još po hrvatsku pominali i podučavalo se po hrvatsku, jer je to bila sam matematika, geografija, sve jedno. A i v pauza med nami smo se pominali skoro nek po hrvatsku, bilo je 2-3 školaru, ki su znali nek nimški, s time smo se pa po nimšku, ali najvećim dijelom smo ostali pri našim hrvatskim jezikom.
I today have the wonderful pleasure to be joined from Vienna by Katharina Tyran. Now, in Vienna, she is a postdoctoral lecturer and a researcher in Austrian terminology that's known as an Universitätsassistentin at the University of Vienna. However, that is her current position at time of recording. She is actually soon to be associate professor at the University of Helsinki. Her research focus is the Slavic language family, specifically the South Slavic languages, and I'm delighted that she's come along today to join me and introduce a Slavic language which I dare say is not very well known. It's not even within the country that it is spoken in. So, first things first, Katharina, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you, and how's the weather in Vienna at the moment?
Well, Vienna at the moment is quite hot. It's about 35 degrees outside, but we are here in this kind of very old building, so the heat did not still manage to really get into us, but it will be there in an hour or two.
Okay, fine. Yes. So shelter from the heat in these lovely old university buildings. That sounds very practical. Now, I think this is really interesting what we're going to be talking about today. I won't, I will let you introduce the language, but this is a language which may surprise people just from its name. And hopefully we can introduce it fully. We can unpack the name that this language bears. So, Katharina, could you introduce for me, please, what is a language that you love and that we're going to be talking about today?
Well, the language I love and we're going to talk about today is Burgenland Croatian. And Burgenland Croatian is we could say Croatian variety spoken in Burgenland, as the name says, and Burgenland is one of the 9 provinces in Austria. But it's a language that is also spoken in the bordering areas in Hungary, in Slovakia, and was also spoken in the Czech Republic, actually. So it's a language that is spoken across state borders, and it's in the Austrian context, one of the 6 recognized minority languages in Austria.
So it has an official status in Austria. That's good. I think that will give the language some support. But is it well known? I mean, in your daily life in Austria and growing up in the country, had people heard of Burgenland Croatian?
It depends on where you grow up and where your schooling is. So I would say that in the more eastern part of Austria, so Vienna, Lower Austria, Burgenland, Styria, Carinthia, which are the areas and territories where you can find other minority languages of minority communities too. You might have heard of it, yes, but the more you go west, I would say rather no. So I can see it actually in the teaching whenever I teach topics on minority languages to my students here in Vienna, that when I ask them what do they know about minority languages and communities in Austria, if they can even count all of them, hardly ever that people actually really do know a lot. They might have heard of it, and in the Viennese and Austrian, Eastern Austrian context, people might recognize it, but mostly only if they have some kind of, I don't know, friends from Burgenland. This is something that happened to me actually sometimes when I was sitting in Vienna, talking to my cousin in one of these small Viennese cafes, in this kleine cafe, which one of these very typical Viennese cafes, that I spoke to her, and all the guy approached us and asked us, what language are you actually speaking? And we were like, well, Croatian. And he was like, no, this is not Croatian. I know Croatian. And we were like, yeah, okay, it's Burgenland Croatian. And this is something that actually happened to me several times in Vienna. Yeah, and this is maybe also to a clarification on the language names. So in the context of the minority community itself, it's very common to just call it Croatian. We call it mostly Burgenland Croatian if we have to kind of, if we leave the in-group and go to the out-group, because for centuries, this language was just named Croatian. And at some point in the 18th, 19th century, people realized, oh, there are actually people speaking a different variety, and labeling is at Croatian, and what about us? And then kind of this naming issue started.
It makes total sense to me that you will be more likely to have heard of Burgenland Croatian, to know it, or to know somebody who speaks it, if you have a personal connection. How likely is that? How many speakers of the language are there today?
Well, counting speakers is always quite difficult. We have official data from a census that the last census was in 2001, when people actually could tick themselves boxes which languages they do speak. And then we had about, some 16 to 19,000 speakers in Austria. However, a lot of community activists actually state that there are way more speakers, and that not all speakers declare themselves. And that very, very positive countings refer to about 30,000 speakers in Burgenland, 15,000 in Vienna, and then some, 10,000 maybe on the Hungarian side, and a few hundreds to thousands on the Slovakian side. So all in all, very, very positive numbers would be about 65,000, but I guess that we are a bit lower, but we are somewhere in between this kind of official numbers and the very positive language activists numbers.
Right, okay. Yeah, I can understand that. And to be clear, there are no monolingual speakers of this. All of these people will also speak German, Austrian German specifically?
There are monolingual speakers maybe until the age of 3 or 4.
Fair enough. Yeah, good point.
Yeah. The latest you get bilingual. Yes, so the community speaks Burgenland Croatian and speaks German or Hungarian, Slovakian, depending on which side of the border they live. And actually, I think that this multilingualism was something that was always there. So it's not new, but it shifted. So back in the days before we had nation states, when this territory was part of the Habsburg monarchy, it was the Western Hungarian lands, people have also been bilingual or even multilingual. So they had to have some kind of proficiency of German, Hungarian, even though they maybe used Croatian as their really first and primary language. But people have always been multilingual, at least to some extent. But today, of course, German is kind of the dominant language in the state, in the territory. So yes, actually, almost everyone is bilingual.
And so, really, then, when you have a bilingual situation, the languages are going to be used in different contexts, in different spheres of life. So, what might those contexts be? Because this is really important for the future of the language. Is it a language of the home of kind of inward-looking communities, or if I go to the right village or town in Burgenland, can I expect to hear Burgenland Croatian on the streets, for example, or in the shops or in the pubs?
Yes, that you can definitely expect. So I would say that it became primarily a language of home, but also of community engagement. So you can go to different festivals, concerts, pubs in Burgenland, in villages that are kind of bilingual, and you will for sure hear Burgenland Croatian there. So it will be a language that will surround you. What we could definitely try to extend these days is to use it as a language, for instance, in academic writing. So this is something that rarely happens. I mean, I do it because I think that it's important. But you can also hear it in the media. You can also read it in the media. So this is the one thing, being a recognized minority, is that you have specific minority rights. And one of these minority rights is that you have the right for your own media. So Burgenland Croats have a newspaper that has been published for over 100 years now. So it's a weekly newspaper, so you can really read the language. You have radio broadcasting in the language every day. You have television broadcasting once a week. So you can also hear it in the media, and you can also actually see it in the linguistic landscape. So this is also something that has been actually in the de jure was in the legal grounds have been there from 1955. It was implemented only in 2000, but every village that is considered to be bilingual has a bilingual sign. So when you enter the village, you will see both the Croatian and the German name. And you have some villages where language activists also started to put up street names, for instance, or information plates, or other signage also in Burgenland Croatian and German, so bilingual. So you can see it, you can hear it, definitely. So if you go through Burgenland, this will be something you could experience, yes.
Fantastic. And this is purely from a nerdy linguistic point of view, a newspaper published for 100 years in this language. That's very useful for your research, right? Or for historical research. That would be invaluable to see how the language has changed over the past 100 years.
Absolutely. So the newspapers are actually one of my main resources and sources for a lot of research questions, because they really documented, on the one hand side, they documented the topics that have been important for the minority community. On the other hand, you can extract discourses on the language itself. So kind of this meta-linguistic level, how the community, the community activists that wrote spoke about the language, which is fantastic. So this was a part of my PhD. And you can actually see how the language itself changed. Yes. And so what we managed to do, I think it was 2 years ago, is that the Austrian National Library that has the newspapers actually digitalized it. So you can have all the editions from the very beginning online, and you can search for names for topics, and this is really fantastic. So this is one of the main resources that I also use in my research. Yes.
And you've mentioned a couple of times now these language activists. Are there official organizations, institutions that are working out there to promote the language, or is it a little bit more decentralized? These people, are they collaborating, or are they individuals working to promote the language?
Well, you have different associations, as in a lot of minority contexts. You have associations for interest groups. Some of them have kind of this more political engagement, and they mostly interact. You can find events every weekend that have kind of this minority context, and there is a lot going on. Some of these associations have this stronger appeal for really kind of working in this sense of language activism. Some of these associations just purely organize events where the language is used too. But you have one association that, for instance, was strongly engaged in the language codification. So this is also maybe something important to state, is that Burgenland Croatian went through this process of codification. So there is a grammar book, there are dictionaries, there is an orthography, and this whole process of codification actually has been discussed for over 100 years. So which way to choose, which path to choose, what would be the smartest solution in order to preserve the language. And in the end, these language activists that have been mostly philologists, people from Slavic studies, from the community, started to codify one of the local varieties, or the most prominently used local variety in Burgenland. So we have actually our own codified language. In the end, it works as a standard language. You have a grammar you should use if you write. And you have dictionary books, and you even have an online dictionary. So we have this codification that has been established from the early 1980s until 2003. This was the period of codification.
And what about education in the area? I mean, do you have primary level schooling that takes place, or at least teaches people this language?
Yes. So you have a bilingual schooling system. In how far this really is bilingual or just 2 hours of language learning very much depends on the local context. But you even have a gymnasium, which means like this high school that is bilingual. So German, Burgenland Croatian German, and Hungarian German. So this is in the south of Burgenland, where you also have a Hungarian minority. So you have a schooling system that fosters the language, yes. So you have this kind of bilingual schooling system on different levels in different regions, but there is actually the possibility to have bilingual schooling in the south of Burgenland, in this proper sense that really all subjects are taught bilingually. In the other schools, you have Croatian, either in some subjects it's taught bilingually, or you have it as a language class. But in south of Burgenland, you really have this one bilingual gymnasium, and you can finish your Matura, which is the school finishing exam in Austria. You can finish bilingual. So this is something that stands out.
Yeah, it really does, and that's very encouraging. I think that's makes me optimistic for the language. Now, really, I think a question that occurs to me, and I think to many of the listeners, would be the origins of this language, how it came to be there. Because, as you have already said, Austria has a long history with Slavic-speaking peoples. Obviously, to the north, you've got the Czech Republic, where they speak Czech. You've got a border with Slovakia, where they speak Slovak. And to the south, you have Slovenia. And I believe that border between Germanic and Slavic has shifted over time. A place like Graz, the very Austrian city of Graz, that's a Slavic name, isn't it? It's a Slavic castle. And yet all those surrounding Slavic languages, well, Croatian isn't one of them. Austria does not share a border with Croatia, where we, of course, find the majority of Croatian speakers. So really, all of that preamble from me goes to say, Burgenland Croatian, how did it get there?
How did they get there? They moved there. So it was a migration process. Yes, you're absolutely right. So it's not kind of this one of these minorities that just has been there forever, as is sometimes stated. So as for instance, the Slovene minority that just became a minority because of border drawing processes. But it was a migration process. So it was a migration process in the 16th century from areas of, today's central Croatia, even parts of northwest Bosnia today, which was the area that was kind of in danger, so to say, because of the Ottoman Empire that shifted in this direction. And on the other hand, the area in former Western Hungary and Lower Austria, so more north, has been very good soil, but very low people. So there have been diseases, there have been different kind of conflicts on these areas. So also kind of smaller armed conflicts. So what happened is that this land that needed peasant population had not enough peasant population, and you had these areas in central Croatia where actually a lot of peasant population lived. So the magnates, which were the landowners of that time, they actually organized migration. So they really migrated sometimes whole villages. And ever since the 16th century, we find this people speaking this very specific Croatian variety in this area. We had a settlement in former Western Hungary all up actually until the Czech Republic today. So also Lower Austria was settled by these Croatian migrants. However, there the language assimilation to German started off in the 18th century. So you can today find surnames where you could guess that these people have some kind of Croatian origin, but they don't speak anymore. But in this area of former Western Hungary that became Burgenland after the dissolution of the Habsburg monarchy, the language still remained vital and was preserved. So this is the story behind it. So it was a migration process in the 16th century. And ever since, as you stated correctly, there is no border to Croatia. So there is kind of territory with different languages in between. So what happened is that the language kind of lost ties to the other Croatian dialects and varieties spoken. So it was kind of cut off, which in the 16th, 17th, 18th century was important because, well, we did not have the communication means we have today. So it kind of preserved its very specific form. So it's based on a Chakavian dialect. This is maybe something to important in the South Slavic language area or in the Croatian language area. You have three main dialects based on the pronoun for the questioning. So the interrogative for you have either što, ča, or kaj. The standard Croatian language today is based on a Štokavian dialect, whereas Burgenland Croatian is mainly based on a Čakavian dialect. So it's the similar varieties as, for instance, in Dalmatia, on the Dalmatian Islands, or also in Istria. So the language kind of being cut off preserved a rather archaic system. So we don't have the casus syncretism that you have in standard Croatian today. So dative, locative, instrumental having the same ending, but we preserve rather old endings, rather old morphemes. So it's a kind of an archaic language that nevertheless developed with this influence of German and Hungarian surrounding. So we have a lot of loan words from German and Hungarian that in Croatia you would not understand per se. So this is kind of this mixture. So it's a language that differs from standard Croatian today. On the codified level and on the written variety, you could probably understand quite okay if you speak of standard Croatian. In everyday communication, I would say it gets harder because what we do as a community when speaking is that we often, switch the codes, use phrases or interjections from, not only German, but Austrian German or even Viennese German or even Burgenland German. So you kind of have to be familiar with a lot of different varieties to get the point of spoken language.
And have you tested this out? Have you spoken some Burgenland Croatian to a Croatian, someone living within the modern day country? What's the reaction?
Actually, this is I tested it with a friend that is native Croatian speaker, but lives in Germany. So she's native both in German and in Croatian. And I had a friend visiting well, he's also from Vienna, but he's also kind of has this Burgenland Croatian background. And we spoke in our everyday kind of communication. And she listened to us and she was like, I don't get anything. So I speak Croatian, I speak German, but I don't know when you start using what language and when German stops and when Croatian starts, because she grew up in Berlin. So she had this kind of different type of German than we use. And so we use a lot of these colloquial expressions from the eastern part of Austria. So this is something very specific in the spoken language. But on the written variety, as said, so written Burgenland Croatian, you could probably understand very good. Also in the media, the spoken language in the media, you would also understand quite okay. So this is something which I also tested with colleagues from Croatia, that whenever they heard something kind of official language used, they said, well, I get almost everything. It's not that hard, specifically if you are into linguistics and if you are familiar with some of the differences of Croatian dialects, then you can probably understand quite a lot.
Okay, yes, understood. There's always going to be a difference between the written language and the spoken language. I think many people have this divide with all sorts of languages across the world. I think a lot of people who might know English look at written French and say, yeah, I can kind of see what this is talking about, whereas spoken French just sounds like one long stream of sound sometimes. So I can understand that, but specifically with people like your friend who know Croatian from Croatia, what might be the problems? Is something in the sounds, in the phonology of Burgenland Croatian? What might be the differences that pose problems for Croatians?
So we have we preserve the older stress. So the accent system is different. So what happened in the Stokavian language area is that the stress shifted to the beginning of the word. So this is something Burgenland Croatian did not do. So our accent system is rather old. So this makes the language sound quite different. For instance, there is one phoneme we do not use. It's a j, which we don't have. So it's a j. So it's not angio, it's angio. And we also do not palatalize the ch, or don't palatalize it as ch, as is in standard Croatian. So these are quite a small differences in the phonetic system. As already said, the morphological system is a bit different. So we have different endings in the casus system, and it's specifically, I think it's mostly lexemes. So it's borrowings from German and from Hungarian standard Croatian too, but on different subjects or different parts of the language. And I think it's specifically these lexical borrowings that make understanding rather different. And of course, what happened over the time is that the syntactical system has shifted stronger to German. So you can see differences here too. But they don't really, you would still understand what you read.
That's interesting that you mention syntax, because that's me, that's my comfort zone. Is Burgenland Croatian like German in its word order? Does it have a V2, a verb second word order, for example?
If you would go to the grammar book would indicate that you should, stick to the rather Slavic word order. But if you kind of hear it in everyday language, then you will see that the German syntax kind of jumped in quite strongly. Yes. But this is what happens. This is what happens in language contact in all cases. So languages just kind of interact, and it's about, actually not the languages are in contact, but people using the languages. So
absolutely. These languages are sitting side by side within the same brains of the same people. So I think this is inevitable. And in terms of the lexical influence, these loan words from German, what type of words do they tend to be? Do they tend to be what we might say super straight words, quite formal words, technical words, words relating to science or politics, or is it much more of a organic mishmash of words coming in?
I would say it's rather a mishmash, but it's a lot of, well, everyday words. So words you use in everyday life. Maybe I could illustrate it with one borrowing. So the thing is that even if Standard Croatian, for instance, borrowed the same word from German, they borrowed it from different varieties of German. So the oven where you cook is in Burgenland Croatian can be used as sporet, which is a loan from German, well, Eastern German, Austrian, Sporherd, der Sparherd. And in Standard Croatian, they also, you will also find it colloquial, but there it's Spacher, which is Sparherd. So you have this difference in German, it's Sparherd or Sporherd. And this, well, leaves us with Sporet and Spacher, which actually are the same loan word, but you would not recognize it today, but it goes back to the same borrowing. So this is also something that, well, they might have borrowed even the same words, but they borrowed it from a different variety from German, which makes a huge difference. So this is maybe, I actually like this example very much because it vividly shows that you might even borrow the same, but in the end, 100 years later, it's something completely different and people cannot relate to it anymore.
Yes, it's very organic and it makes total sense. It's all these different peoples and different varieties of languages intermixing in this very linguistically rich region. It makes sense to me, but nonetheless, I feel sorry for Croatian speakers who might end up in Burgenland and think, aha, right, I'm going to speak this language, and actually, no, it's a bit more difficult than that.
Well, yes, but we experienced that actually there is a very nice interaction because a lot of people from Croatia moved to Burgenland in the 90s as kind of war refugees, but also now in the last years as Croatia is experiencing this very strong brain drain. So there is actually a very active community that moved from Croatia or even Bosnia and Serbia to Burgenland villages, and they interact quite nicely, and they see that there is something in common they have in the language, and then their kids go to school and, well, they teach Burgenland Croatian there, and then, well, children just embrace all the language varieties. So it's not a problem. You can, if you are surrounded by the language on an everyday basis, it's even better. So you have more varieties of Croatian or Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian you can interact with. So it's actually a very nice kind of coming together of different South Slavic varieties in this area.
You mentioned the wonderful adaptability of children to learn the different languages. These Croatian children now arriving in the Burgenland and picking up the local flavour of Croatian. Really, that leads me nicely on to ask, what is the future of Burgenland Croatian? How do you feel about the next century, for example, of this language?
This is a tough question. There are quite pessimistic voices labeling the language as endangered, which it probably is. I mean, if you go to the different models, it is an endangered language. But I, for myself, would stay optimistic and say that we had this discourse of endangerment for at least 150 years, and well, we are still there speaking. And I really think that it is important that, on the one hand side, official politics finally recognize the importance of multilingual settings and foster an environment of multilingualism being valued, and specifically multilingualism, which is not English and French and German only. On the end, I think that kind of the community members and the people also should embrace their multilingual knowledge, and that we need to use languages. We need to use languages in so many different domains and settings. And this is kind of something I would like to, say to all the people out there that no matter what language it is, specifically if it's a minoritized language, just go ahead and speak and write it. And this is where I hope to kind of transfer this optimism. But I see I see, for instance, in my family that the smallest generation, they still speak the language, and they do speak it, and they speak it on an everyday level, and they interact with the language. So I try to be very optimistic about the language, and I hope that we will still be there in 100 years. Because I mean, what happened to me so many times is when I told people what I'm dealing with and what my language is, then they sometimes looked at me like, "Oh my God, we thought that you just exist in the museum anymore." And I'm like, no, we are out there and we do speak the language, so we are there. We are a small community, but still the language is there, and I hope that there are enough people still using it in 100 and in 200 years, so that my diagnosis will stay right and I can stay optimistic.
Section 2 of the whole format of the show remains the same. This is our chance to turn away from the language in the abstract and get to know somebody who knows this language really, really well, which is, of course, you. Now, tell us, what is your story with this language and what role does it play in your life today?
Well, it plays a huge role in my life. Burgenland Croatian is my first language. So it's the language I grew up with. It's the language I spoke it was the only language I spoke until I was 3. So I'm one of these people who learned German only in kindergarten. So despite the fact that I grew up in Vienna, Burgenland Croatian was my only language until the age of 3, yes. Ever since it's the language of my family. It's a very emotional language for me, but it's also one of my main research interests. So I'm dealing with the language on several levels in my professional life too. And I also really started using the language in as many domains as possible. So whenever I have the possibility, for instance, using it as an official language, I do so. And I even got a letter saying U ime Republike, in the name of the Republic, in Croatian, an Austrian letter, which was one of my very, very big successes. I really try to use the language whenever possible. I also write scientific essays in Burgenland Croatian because I really think it's important that we use the language in so many different spheres and domains. But it remains my absolutely personal family language. So it's the language we still do speak at home. It's the language I speak with almost all my family members. It's the language I speak with a lot of friends and community members. And it is definitely my language of emotion. So whenever I get really, really, really upset, and I speak, for instance, standard Croatian, I unconsciously shift to Burgenland Croatian. So it's my unconscious language of emotion too. So it covers a very, very broad range of topics in my life.
I know exactly what you mean. And yes, some languages are reserved for very personal and emotional moments. What language would you speak to animals in, for example? Like, I find that, Czech, for me, is a perfectly good language for a cat. It seems dignified and proper. Not English, I find.
This is interesting. To animals, I would speak, it would depend on the place where I am, actually. So I would address a cat in Croatia, probably in standard Croatian. I would address a cat in Burgenland Croatian, I guess. But in Vienna, either Burgenland Croatian or German. Yeah. But babies, for instance, with babies, I can speak only Burgenland Croatian. This comes automatically. I would never speak German to a baby. This is kind of something it's happening really automatically.
And you mentioned there that you also speak standard Croatian too. When did that enter the scene for you? When did you learn that as a language? And how was that process? Was it okay, or could it actually be confusing at times, mixing up the two varieties of Croatian?
It was, so I was actually, we spent almost every summer in Croatia. So I was surrounded by, not standard Croatian because it was in Dalmatian Islands. So they spoke their very, very specific variety there. But for me, it was, I went on an internship when I was 17 to Dubrovnik, which is in Croatia. And I worked in a hotel there. And when I started working there, first, they always thought that I was from Slovenia because, our Burgenland Croatian, if you're rather from the southern parts of Croatia, you could kind of mix it up with Slovene too. And then for the first 2 weeks, I think I didn't speak a lot. I just listened and listened and listened and listened. And then at one moment I started speaking. And this was kind of my step into standard Croatian. Whereas I have to say that this variety spoken in Dubrovnik is also very specific. So when I came then to other parts of Croatia, they really looked at me like, so why are you speaking that way? And ever since I started, so I picked up a lot of different varieties from not only Croatian, but also Bosnian and Serbian. So I can switch quite easily, and I can shift depending on people I'm talking to. But yeah, so my interaction with standard Croatian was when I was about 17. And then I decided to study Slavic studies because I really wanted to. I never learned neither Burgenland Croatian nor standard Croatian in any form of schooling system because I grew up in Vienna. So I was kind of outside the territory, and we did not have bilingual schooling system, or we do not have bilingual schooling system in Vienna. So it was really just a language I learned at home by speaking. And this was actually the point when I decided to study Slavic languages. And what happened with the mixing was when I started with Russian. So then my brain got super confused with Russian, standard Croatian, and Burgenland Croatian. So at one moment, I remember after this intense Russian course in the first semester, my mother woke me up. I think it was around Christmas, and I was very sleepy and started speaking to her, and she looked at me and said, "What was that?" And then I realized that it was actually Russian. So this, the mixing happened with Russian then. But standard Croatian and Burgenland Croatian, it's kind of no strong confusions about that.
And you mentioned there that, you would spend this time in Dalmatia, the coastal part of Croatia there with all the, the beautiful islands on the Mediterranean. Well, that's interesting because you have previously mentioned Dalmatia as the place where they speak Chakavian Croatian, this dialect, which is also the subgroup or the type of Croatian which Burgenland Croatian is also. So is that closer? Is that recognizably closer to Burgenland Croatian, what they might be speaking in, say, I don't know, Istria or Dalmatia?
Yes, but interestingly, kind of this similarity of dialects led to the assumption that Burgenland Croats actually migrated from the coastal area. So until the mid-19th century, or even later, until the beginning of the 20th century, there was this hypothesis that actually the community migrated from the sea, because of course it's very nice if you can say that you're from the sea. Well, it was really primarily also because of this Chakavian variety spoken there, where you could find, of course, strong similarities. But there has been dialectology research afterwards by actually my professor in Vienna back in the days when I studied, who showed that the whole Chakavian language area, was research earlier already knew that Chakavian has been spoken, in the mainland Croatia too, before the 16th century. And my former professor, he showed that the Burgenland Croatian dialects and varieties are actually very strongly or are very similar to the Chakavian varieties that have been spoken in central Croatia and not so much on the coast. But nevertheless, of course, it's the same dialect group, so you can find a lot of similarities. Chakavian is, of course, also very split into subgroups, but there are specific dialects where you can really hear that this is kind of one language group that is different to the standard. So there are villages in Istria and there are villages on some Croatian islands where you really have the feeling that, wow, I understand a lot, not all, because they maybe have some more loanwords from, Italian or Romance languages. But nevertheless, you hear, for instance, also in phonology, you have a lot of diphthongization, you have very strong vocalization, and you can find this in these dialects too. And this is something that differs to the standard language. So you can definitely find nice combinations and correlations there.
Now, I ask for the third section and the second of the big questions. I ask all my guests, what is something that you love about this language? You have absolute free reign, Katharina, to tell us whatever you want. So please choose one feature of the language and share it with us today.
I would share one feature and one kind of broader notion. So one feature I really love about the language is one expression. It's a very specific expression that you can only understand in our variety. And this is to se ide van, which is a translation from Austrian German expression das geht sich aus, which in northern Germany also no one would understand, and which covers a variety of meanings. So you can express with this everything from you will fit in a parking slot until, I don't know, I can fit in the dress, or this will be enough, or you don't need more salt, or this would work out. So this is really something, it's an expression that is so typical for Eastern Austria and for Vienna, for Burgenland, for Lower Austria, das geht sich aus, which I love. And I cannot understand how Germans can live without it, because I need it 100 times a day. And what we did in Burgenland Croatian is just to translate it into to se ide van. And this is something we can really just understand inside the community. And this maybe leads me to this kind of broader notion of what stands out, or what is super cool for me about the language, is that it works on the one hand side as a secret language. So with outside the community, I can speak it and no one could understand me probably. But it's likewise, it worked for me, well, really worldwide as a door opener in so many situations, with people engaging and asking what kind of language this is. With people who have some kind of Slavic background. I mean, this happened to me in New York, that a guy approached me and asked me, so what is this language? This is so interesting. This is so fascinating. And then he started speaking about that he was actually from southern Serbia and that he did not speak Serbian to his family for years, and that he kind of felt back in the days when he was a child. So this small language opened doors and conversations all over the world. And this is something I love. So both being this kind of secret language, but also a door opener in so many situations.
Fantastic. Could you repeat that phrase for us and perhaps take us through it word by word so that we can all use it now?
To se ide van. Das ist to. Se, je, sich. Ide, geht. Van, aus. So this will work out, or this will go out. Actually, if you translate it literally to English, is this will go out. But this doesn't make any sense in English.
This will work out. That works.
Yeah, this will work out, yeah. But this will work out doesn't have the same range of meanings.
Maybe it'll be all right. It'll be okay. It'll be right.
Yeah, but this is what I love about it. So you have one expression you can cover, like you need 5 others in other languages, so...
My third and final question remains the same as it does for all my guests, which is, what is your parting point? What is the thing that you want to impress upon our listeners now as they go out into the world knowing about this amazing minority language of Austria?
Well, I think for me, it would be important that people take away that the language is alive and that it is really spoken and used, and that it's not a language for the museum yet. So this is something that's very important for me. And I think another thing is that we should stronger embrace the legacy of minority language speakers in Europe generally, but specifically, for instance, speakers of Burgenland Croatian. So we have had this stigmatization, minoritization for decades. We know how it feels if people look at you weirdly because you speak a Slavic language, which maybe you could imagine that, well, in Austria in the 60s and 70s and 80s was not so valuable. So a lot of discussions and problems we are approaching today in a globalized world full of migration, we have experience in this. So I think that specifically minority languages and specifically kind of this Burgenland Croatian experiences and legacies could help us in addressing current topics. And this is something I would really like to give away as a takeaway, that we don't that we stop thinking kind of these rather autochtonously framed minority languages and more recent languages of more recent migration, that we think them separately. I think we need to kind of stronger interact these different multilingual settings.
Absolutely. So yes, new languages that might be arriving within Europe with new waves of migration, or more recent waves such as, I don't know, something like German Turkish or something like that. Burgenland Croatian was in the same position. Yes, centuries ago, but it's the same story repeating itself.
Well, it's not only centuries ago, but if I look at European discourses at the time where we have discussions about children in school using, for instance, Arabic or Turkish or Ukraine, and they are kind of labeled as they are deficient in the languages of the states they live in. This is an experience we had in Burgenland Croatian too. So we had for decades also the notion that at school you have to speak German, and if there is a pause, you have to speak German, and you're not allowed to use your minority language outside a very small community because, social advancement can only be achieved if you speak the language of the state. So this is an experience we had not so far ago, and this is an experience people are going through today too. So, and this is what I mean by kind of this legacy we have in addressing really, really important and contemporary questions.
I can imagine. Yes, perhaps these languages like Burgenland Croatian are actually languages for the future, as examples of how people can be truly bilingual, societies can be bilingual. But yes, as you say, for decades, it's sort of been an exception to the nation-building project, this idea, very much a 19th century concept of a parcel of land and everybody speaks the same thing within those borders, which is very recent. And because of it, languages like Burgenland Croatian have suffered. But maybe now, as these borders become a little bit more permeable, at least in Europe, the time of Burgenland Croatian will come again.
I hope so. I like this.
Wonderful. Well, yes, so much to learn from a language like this, and thank you so much for spending the time, a lot of time today, to walk us through this language, to introduce it so fully. Do you have any recommendations for people if they would like to take their interest further, if they would like to find out more about you and your research, or just general resources online?
Well, if you want to find out more about me or contact me regarding any question, just feel free to Google my name, because I'm the only person with this combination of name and surname. So you will easily find me, and feel free to reach out. And if you're interested in the language or learning words, just Google Burgenland Croatian, and you will find media. You will find different associations offering also online. I'm sure you will find a lot of stuff on the internet. And travel to Burgenland and Vienna, and you can engage with the language.
Super. Well, lots of great recommendations there. Katharina, from me and on behalf of the listeners, just thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Burgenland isn't the only place in Europe with a Croatian-speaking community today, following migration in the 16th century. There is also Molise Slavic, spoken in the Italian region of Molise. This region, the second smallest in Italy, sits on the other side of the Adriatic Sea from Croatia, specifically the long coastal region of Dalmatia. It was from Dalmatia that the ancestors of the Molise Slavs emigrated, which means that the language has different geographical and dialectal origins from Burgenland Croatian. Today, Molise Slavic is spoken in 3 municipalities, quite far inland from the sea. The language is considerably more endangered than Burgenland Croatian, with roughly only 30% of the village's 1,700 inhabitants speaking it actively. Molise Slavic is of great interest, though, among linguists, particularly those who study the effects of contact between different languages. For one example, unusually for a Slavic language, Molise Slavic has an indefinite article, like English a. The article in question is na, likely derived from Croatian jedna, the number 1, but under the influence of Italian una. Likewise, like Italian and local Romance languages, Molise Slavic has reduced its grammatical genders from 3 to 2, losing the neuter gender entirely. After 5 centuries of life in Italy, it's cool but unsurprising that this Slavic language is looking a lot more Italian. That's all for another episode of A Language I Love Is. If you've enjoyed this episode, again, please do subscribe and give the show a rating. And my heartfelt thanks go to my guest today, Katharina Tyran, and also to you, the listener, for listening. Keep well and keep loving language.